My parents stole my $120,000 MBA fund for my golden sister's dream house. Justice, karma, and Uncle Jake's ruthless plan restored it all. I never imagined I'd be on Reddit posting stuff like this. But here I am. Recently, I, to 8F, learned that my parents had embezzled my $120,000 MBA money to assist my sister, Ashley, 35F, and her fiancé, Nathan, 37M, in purchasing a home. I'm still trying to comprehend the extent of their betrayal, and the entire scenario feels unreal. Allow me to walk you through the first part of this nightmare. Dad's parents, my grandparents, were extremely well off and always placed a high priority on education. They were traditional in the finest sense of the word. They valued hard work, conserving money, and making long-term investments. I didn't get to visit them very frequently because they lived in a different state. But whenever we spoke or met, they expressed their concern for my future. Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you, my grandmother used to say. And now I see how ironic that is. My grandfather died 3 years ago following a brief illness. Even though it was awful, Grandma was still with us. She was the family's pillar of support, recognizing each birthday and accomplishment and sending heartfelt cards and care packages. We also lost her last year, on the day of her death. I was sitting in my apartment, going over every letter she had ever sent me. I was unaware at the time that she and Grandpa had been constructing something much larger for my future. But each one included some life lessons and typically a modest check for your education fund. The allocation first appeared equitable when their will was read. My parents' savings and home were inherited. Ashley received family treasures and all of grandmother's jewelry, which was valued at tens of thousands of dollars. A sizable education fund was bequeathed to me, especially for my MBA courses. This money was to be utilized only for my schooling. According to the will, my parents were assigned to oversee it till I required it because I was already employed. I was appreciative at the time that my grandparents had given my future such serious consideration. I never once imagined my parents would tamper with the fund. In retrospect, though, I ought to have recognized the warning indications. Ashley has always been our family's golden child, even from my earliest recollections. It's difficult to say without coming across as resentful, but she was the person my parents loved the most. She was great at all she did. She was incredibly gifted, diligent, and unique. I can still clearly recall graduating from high school. I had recently won a prominent science competition, received a full scholarship to college, and was valedictorian. My parents were using their phones and hardly paying attention when I looked out at the audience during my speech. They were ecstatic when Ashley, who had already dropped out of college twice, revealed later that night that she was considering a career in teaching. "You are simply amazing with kids," they exclaimed. I received a brief good job acknowledgement for my accomplishments that day. Throughout my life, this trend persisted. I got a position at a famous company after working hard and graduating with honors. Over the past 6 years, I have ascended the corporate ladder, gaining the respect and admiration of both superiors and colleagues. As a senior project manager, I oversee a group of 15 employees and manage accounts worth millions of dollars. However, to my parents, I was always just the sensible one, the one who got away with it because I was naturally smart. Ashley, on the other hand, changed jobs before becoming a teacher. Nathan is the head zookeeper at our neighborhood zoo, and she is currently the kindergarten administrator at a tiny private school. I don't have any personal problems with them, and they're decent enough folks. Although they appear content and are competent in their careers, their combined income is at best meager. They had been discussing the necessity of purchasing a home nonstop for the past year. Each family meal became a debate about the cost of real estate and how they were throwing money away on rent. They would lament the unfairness of the market while admiring homes that were much beyond their means. Even though Ashley and Nathan are in their mid-30s, they are still viewed as young people in need of assistance. and my parents would nod empathetically and say things like, "You deserve a nice house, and it's so hard for young people these days." I began working on my MBA program applications about a month ago. I had been preparing this relocation for years, so it wasn't an abrupt decision. I've done a ton of program research, strategically developed my profession, and kept up a flawless work record. I want to enroll in a prestigious program that will enable me to advance into executive leadership roles at my present employer. Every C-level executive has an MBA from a reputable university, and I'm resolved to do the same. I mentioned the education fund to my parents one evening because the application costs alone for prestigious MBA programs can amount to thousands of dollars. I needed to know exactly how much was accessible. My first genuine danger indicator should have been their response. "Don't worry about it," my dad murmured, shifting uneasily in his chair. My mother hurriedly added, "Just concentrate on your applications for the time being. We'll talk when the time comes." They then abruptly shifted the conversation to Ashley and Nathan's house hunting. I initially tried to dismiss it, thinking perhaps they were simply being clumsy with the papers. However, something didn't feel right. I brought it up again, more bluntly. A week later, I clarified that I needed to know if the funds were available because I needed to budget for applying to multiple prestigious schools. They dropped the bomb at that point. "We used the MBA money for Ashley," my mother replied in the most casual way possible. "She is purchasing a home with Nathan." Thinking I must have misheard, I gazed at her. My dad added that Ashley needed it right now, and that it wouldn't be fair for me to get a free ride when Ashley had worked so hard with student loans. When I asked her to repeat herself, I went crazy. I'm not proud of my response, but it was the release of years' worth of repressed annoyance. I insisted on knowing how they could harm me and how they could embezzle the funds my grandparents had set aside expressly for my schooling. The will had been clear about how that money was to be utilized, so I pointed out that it was prohibited. My mother simply shrugged her eyes, as if I were exaggerating. She said, "You'll figure it out. It's not as though you can't borrow money like everyone else." They pretended that they had done nothing wrong and that neither my future nor my grandparents' wishes mattered. I then brought up taking legal action. Even though I'm not a lawyer, it's obvious that what they did was unlawful. And what did they do? "Do you know?" They chuckled. They laughed aloud, not merely chuckling. "With what money?" My father asked, staring me in the eye. "Even a lawyer is out of your price range." Additionally, my mother said, "Don't be silly. This is a family-run enterprise." The humiliation I felt at the time is beyond words. Stunned, I stood there. The realization that they had always viewed me as an afterthought came to me suddenly, someone whose future they could forego in order to help Ashley. They didn't care about my financial freedom, my prosperous career, or my academic accomplishments. I would remain the underdog forever. I had trouble sleeping that night. I couldn't stop thinking about how my grandparents had trusted my parents to act morally. They were unaware of the true nature of my home life, since it didn't seem worth it. I never told anyone about how I was treated. I mean, I wasn't being mistreated, was I? They simply didn't care about me as much as they did about Ashley. They weren't violent. I arrived at work early the following morning and asked to speak with my employer, Mr. Thompson, in private. Since I started working for the company, he has been a mentor to me. Therefore, he's not just any boss. He has always encouraged me to pursue my career goals and has seen me rise from a junior role to team leader. More significantly, he has experience in corporate law and keeps up relationships with leading law firms. I also intended to get in touch with my dad's cousin, Uncle Jake. He is a prosperous businessman who consistently seemed to see through the partiality of my parents. Although he wasn't there much when I was growing up, he always showed genuine interest in my accomplishments and future aspirations. In addition, he is the only person in my family who has greater influence and accomplishment than my parents. Something inside of me exploded when my parents made fun of me. Even though I never wanted things to go ugly, since I've always been the quiet one, the sensible one, who never caused a stir, they assumed I had no influence. However, they are going to discover that the daughter they have consistently undervalued is much more powerful than they initially thought. First update. Since my last post, which was 2 weeks ago, a lot has transpired. Things proceeded more quickly than I had anticipated following my visit with Mr. Thompson. In addition to giving me his whole support, he put me in touch with a buddy at Wilson and Partners, one of the best law companies in the city. He reminded me, this is about holding your parents accountable and respecting your grandparents' wishes, not just about money. It was enlightening to meet the attorneys. They attested to the fact that my parents' acts clearly violated the terms of the will and their fiduciary duties. Finding out that my parents might be charged with a crime for their acts shocked me the most. The lawyers found something unsettling long before they told me my parents had begun moving the funds to Ashley's account months before. Uncle Jake's intervention, however, was the true game changer. Within hours of my contacting him on LinkedIn, he gave me a call. He responded in a way that exceeded my expectations. I always knew your parents played favorites, he replied, but stealing from their own daughter, that crosses every line. Don't worry about the legal fees. I'm handling everything. Uncle Jake was more than simply a talker. He did something right away. He assembled a group of attorneys with expertise in estate law and engaged a forensic accountant to track down every penny of the fund money. They gathered enough proof in a matter of days to demonstrate that my parents had spent months draining the college money in a methodical manner. The initial altercation took place on Friday. I was called by my parents' attorney in an attempt to reach a family settlement. In exchange for me dropping any legal action, they promised to cover some of the MBA expenses. Uncle Jake responded harshly, saying, "You will either be charged with a crime or return the entire sum plus interest and penalties. No negotiations will take place." The response from my parents was invaluable. They began sending me emails nonstop. "How could you involve outsiders in family matters? We were going to help you eventually. You're destroying this family." Without replying, I sent everything to Uncle Jake's legal team. He then disclosed the second part of his strategy. In addition to pursuing the money, he is advocating for a thorough examination of my parents' financial transactions, implying that there may be further irregularities that we are now unaware of. Yesterday, Ashley finally spoke up. She claimed in a lengthy email to me that she was clueless about the source of the house money. "Mom and Dad said they had savings set aside for us," she wrote in her letter. "I never thought they would steal your money." She concluded by requesting that I exercise common sense and come up with a family solution. I showed Uncle Jake her email. His answer was straightforward: send it on to the attorneys. It is proof that she was aware of the money. It had already happened, but she did not try to return it. She is therefore complicit. This morning was the most fulfilling time. In a hurry, the lawyer for my parents called Uncle Jake. The forensic accountant apparently found that my parents had started utilizing their power of attorney to transfer money even before my grandma passed away. This can greatly increase the charges. Right now, my parents are making a valiant effort to turn around. Mom begged me to contact them in a heartfelt voicemail, stating that they would find a way to pay back the money, although Dad acknowledged in an email that they may have made a mistake. He maintained that they were just trying to help the family. Uncle Jake gave straightforward advice: avoid answering anything. Give them a panic. When you were weak, they made fun of you. Now it's their turn to feel helpless. All of this has been made possible by Mr. Thompson's tremendous assistance. In addition to producing an excellent reference letter, he has already approved my leave of absence for when I begin my MBA school. He informed me today, "You're displaying remarkable composure. Not many people could handle this situation with such professionalism." Unless my parents return the entire cash plus fines, the legal team is getting ready to bring official charges the following week. Uncle Jake predicts that in order to pay for everything, they will have to sell some assets, but in his own words, that's their problem. not yours. Until this is addressed, I will be staying with a friend. Building security has been told not to let my parents into my apartment when they attempted to arrive. In order to record any attempts by my parents to get in touch with me, Uncle Jake also engaged a private investigator. If required, this material might be used to demonstrate harassment. Second update: 3 weeks have passed since my last report, and things have significantly worsened. At last, I am able to provide the specifics of our legal strategy development. Much more was revealed by the forensic inquiry than we had anticipated. During our first court filing, the first bombshell was revealed. The evidence showed that they were methodically shifting funds around in order to transfer them to Ashley. During the initial hearing, their lawyer's expression was invaluable. It is obvious that he was unaware of the severity of their financial misdeeds. He really requested a break to speak with my parents after our legal team showed them the recorded chronology of transactions. Later on, I found out that he confronted my parents for not telling him certain facts, and he is now thinking of leaving their case. The previous caregiver for my grandmother made the most startling admission. Seeing our legal notification in the estate documents, she contacted Uncle Jake. It turns out that my grandmother had made it very clear that the money was only for my education by bringing up the MBA fund with my parents several times in her last months. These exchanges were also recorded in the caregiver's notes. She had been documenting every family conversation in a care diary. Ashley's participation has also changed in an intriguing way. She hired her own attorney after realizing the legal ramifications of accepting stolen funds because they expected her to support the family. This caused a serious gap between her and our parents. My parents were in a panic when her lawyer suggested that she should keep her distance from the matter. The state of the house has gotten especially disorganized. The acquisition is currently being investigated by the court since the down payment was made using stolen money. The problem has been communicated to Ashley and Nathan's mortgage lender, who is currently examining the loan application. A fraud investigation might be initiated if my parents falsified any of the financial records they co-signed unexpectedly. Uncle Jake's crew also discovered that my parents had been informing members of my extended family that I had consented to give Ashley my MBA fund. They seem to have been preparing their defense in case the money transfer was questioned, as they had been fabricating this story for months. Now, a number of family members have come forward with emails and messages from my parents that support this untrue story. The deposition was the most satisfying development. My father made an effort to keep his haughty demeanor until Uncle Jake's attorney produced proof of their calculated scheme. It was quite painful to watch him struggle to describe what they had done. My mother really lost it when she acknowledged that they had no intention of repaying the money they had stolen. They have been almost hilarious in their attempts to control the damage. Despite having numerous recorded conversations with my grandmother and her attorneys, they are now attempting to assert that they were perplexed by the wording of the will. 2 of their attorneys have already resigned, so this is their 3rd attorney, and they are frantically trying to reach a settlement. The final terms were outlined by our legal staff, who made it apparent that there was no opportunity for discussion. Every penny they took would have to be paid back with interest that would start to accrue the day they took the money. They would also be in charge of paying for all of our legal fees, including the forensic investigation, which had become quite expensive. We also insisted that they stop gaslighting and attempting to rewrite the facts and submit a formal written admission of their misconduct. Last but not least, they would need to sign a legally forcible contract committing them to stop communicating with me in any way, no more utilizing family members as messengers, deceptive messages, or unexpected visits. The socioeconomic status of my parents is deteriorating. Several of their acquaintances have quietly told me how shocked they are, and word has spread throughout their neighborhood. My father's golf club is reconsidering his membership, and my mother's bridge club asked her to resign as treasurer. People don't feel comfortable hanging around with someone who would steal from their own child. It turns out Ashley's circumstances are also getting worse. concerned about having a principal embroiled in financial malfeasance. The board of directors at her school has set a meeting to review her position. Because Nathan co-signed loan documents that may include misleading information, their place of employment is undergoing an ethics assessment. The last development is quite pleasing. Do you recall how my folks snickered when I brought up the idea of filing a lawsuit? In order to stop any more financial fraud, Uncle Jake's team recently submitted a motion to freeze their assets. Within hours, their attorney contacted them, pleading for a settlement conference. Uncle Jake is still brutal in his methods. In response to my parents' attempts to persuade him to be loyal to the family, he sent a caustic email with the entire extended family copied on it. Family loyalty. You lost any right to talk about loyalty when you stole from your daughter and laughed in her face. Get ready to face the consequences of your actions. My parents are getting really upset because I haven't spoken to them at all. They have turned to using friends and family to get in touch on their behalf. But each effort simply strengthens our allegation of harassment. Every day, their desperation becomes more apparent. Third update. For months have passed since my last update, and I can now finally reveal the story's resolution. The outcome of the last court procedures is more heartbreaking for my parents than any of us could have imagined. Allow me to explain how justice was ultimately achieved. Let me start by sharing my favorite moment, which was the last hearing when my parents realized they had no other choice. At last, their facade broke. In her closing remarks, the judge was very severe, describing their behavior as a calculated betrayal of both their daughters and their own parents' last desires. She said in particular that they showed a startling degree of moral decay in their laughter at my first legal threat. In the end, the forensic analysis showed that my parents had been preparing this heist for more than a year prior to my grandmother's passing. They had methodically made up fictitious family contracts and documented fictitious discussions regarding my voluntarily relinquishing the MBA fund. According to the court, their actions were considerably worse because of their premeditation. The fines were hefty. In addition to returning my MBA money plus interest, they were mandated to pay punitive damages that nearly doubled the initial amount. The judge justified the severe punishment by pointing to their deliberate malice and repeated attempts to mislead the court. The fascinating part is that my parents had to sell their home, yes, the home they inherited from my grandparents in order to pay these charges. Nobody failed to notice the irony. They have significantly downgraded from their previous way of life to renting a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. Their decline in society has been dramatic. The membership in the country club was retracted, their seats on different community boards were lost, and the social network that my mother built over the course of several decades has fallen apart. It turns out that upper-middle-class suburban society does not tolerate stealing from children and lying about it. The repercussions on the job have been just as bad. My father, who took great satisfaction in his business reputation, was compelled to retire early. When someone has been legally shown to have taken from their own child's inheritance, no one wants to do business with them. At local businesses, his former co-workers now steer clear of him. After leading local charity organizations, my mother was forced to leave her volunteer posts. The last straw was when they were asked to resign from all leadership positions at their church, of which they had been active members for 20 years. They've become social pariahs in their own community. Uncle Jake said Ashley and Nathan's relationship is arguably the most noteworthy development, their ideal home. They went crazy when the mortgage firm learned that the down payment was made with stolen money. They revoked their approval of the loan. They are currently dealing with their own legal problems as a result of their willful acceptance of stolen funds. Ashley's career has completely collapsed. In their formal statement, the school board cited ethical concerns and loss of community trust as reasons for their unanimous decision to remove her as principal. Since the news has gone viral in the local school community, she is now having trouble finding even entry-level teaching jobs. Nathan's situation wasn't any better. He was placed on administrative leave by the zoo while his involvement in the financial misbehavior was looked into. even though he wasn't personally responsible for the money theft. His signature on loan documents that contain false information has created ethical questions. The strain was too much for their relationship to handle. Nathan left their apartment last week. He accused her of being like her parents, while Ashley accused him of not being more supportive during the situation. They are currently in the process of calling it quits on their engagement. Uncle Jake's plan of total social and legal ruin was more successful than anyone could have predicted. He set up a family meeting when my parents attempted to make one more plea for family loyalty, not to patch things up, but to explain what they had done. In front of the whole extended family, he provided a timeline of their deceit at this discussion, detailing the false documents they produced and the lies they told. Disgust was the universal response. A number of family members who had first attempted to resolve the conflict now publicly denounced my parents. The meeting essentially put an end to any remaining family support they may have had. The most telling moment occurred when my mother's sister, who had always been one of their closest supporters, rose up and stated, "I don't even recognize who you are anymore. In my case, I've come out stronger than before. Along with significant damages, my MBA fund has been fully refunded. In addition to receiving my money returned, I was accepted into a prestigious MBA program on a merit scholarship." In his letter of reference, Mr. Thompson praised my exceptional skill and integrity in handling this problem. "My employer has been really helpful. They have granted me permission to take a leave of absence for the MBA program and have even promised me an executive post after I graduate. Your handling of this situation demonstrated that you possess the strength and judgment required for senior leadership." Mr. Thompson informed me, "Uncle Jake is now regarded as a real mentor. After I finish my MBA, he is already discussing possible investment opportunities with me and has introduced me to his business network." He told me, "Your grandparents would be proud of you because you've shown that you have the backbone for business." I've relocated to an upscale apartment in a gated complex that keeps my folks at bay. The doorman is instructed not to let them in and has their photos. Their phone lines and emails have been blocked, and all efforts at communication now go directly to our legal department. The last turn of the blade. Nathan used to work at the zoo, which is just next to my parents' new apartment. They must view the location that symbolizes the start of their demise every day. According to Uncle Jake, karma can be humorous at times. Someone in their social circle wrote me an anonymous letter yesterday. "It seems that my mother stays at home most of the time, only going out for essentials. It has been reported that my father spends hours sitting by himself at a nearby coffee shop, gazing off into space. The social calendar they used to have is now absolutely vacant." I find myself thinking about my grandmother's statement, "Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you." As I get ready to begin my MBA school, she was correct. With her foresight and Uncle Jake's assistance, I've now not only safeguarded my education fund, but also imparted a lifelong lesson to my parents. That concludes this tale. I appreciate everyone's support along this journey. I'm at peace knowing that justice has been done, even though I never wanted things to end this way. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you. Parents ignored my milestones for my brother's events, so I didn't tell them about my wedding. Now they're publicly shamed and facing divorce. My younger brother is Mike, to 1M, and I'm to 7F. He's always grumbling and expecting others to meet him. He is the definition of a man-child and a mama's boy. My parents hovered over him for everything. From birth, he was born. My parents totally ignored me. He has no special needs or a difficult birth. Particularly, my mother, 50F, transformed from a loving mother to one of those boy moms people ridicule on the internet. Though he still loved and supported me, my father, 50M, has always been too cowardly to challenge my mother and let me prevail at least once. My grandfather, 76M, always called my parents out on their actions and never liked my brother. Hence, he was the only one who stuck up for me. Though Dad lives on the other side of the nation, I couldn't see him frequently. I remind him of his late wife, my grandma, and we have a very unique link. Mike knows our mom adores him and enjoys pushing it in my face. This and his behavior have always caused friction between us. He is a horrible human, spoiled and bratty. Not even sure how many times I got in hot water for activities I performed better than him or for things he framed me for. His only aptitude is football, which landed him a scholarship to a respectable out-of-state university. Apparently, my fund had been taken to defray bills after a fire, only for me to find years later that Mike had been given the money to purchase a house and a car. So, my parents paid nothing for my schooling at public university. I ran across Lucas. I originally found great attraction in him. Of course, I met other people who are now my dearest friends. Owing to them and Lucas, my best friend for years before we got together, I was able to move out of my parents' house. Lucas and I both have really good pay now and are well known in our industries. Now let us focus on the major problem. Lucas told me a year ago. Being very private individuals, we did not broadcast it on social media. My parents laughed off my telling them with a, "That's nice." I am beginning to believe they paid hardly any attention to me. We chose to have a modest yet elegant ceremony and celebration among friends and relatives. Though they never answered the invitation, Lucas persuaded me to invite my brother and mom. Every time I went and tried to discuss the wedding, without mentioning it, my mother would always talk over me about the adventures and successes of my brother. I once grew bored and stopped my mother to let her know about an event I had scheduled with an unmovable date. She wanted them there, but my brother was playing the last game of the season on that same day, and they couldn't make it. Of course, this preference did not surprise me. They missed my ballet performances and both my university and high school graduations for events connected to him. By now, I wanted to be petty. I told my parents it wasn't a problem for them to miss the event, deliberately omitting the information it was my wedding, and I didn't press any more. Imagine a few weeks ago I was married. It was just beautiful. There was my family, Lucas's family, and our buddy. We had an amazing time. It was exactly right, and my grandpa was glad to be giving me away. My cousins questioned me several times about the absence of my parents. I told them straight out they couldn't come since they had a brother's game to attend. They looked at me a few times. My grandpa seemed obviously upset for a little, but otherwise, nothing unusual happened. Lucas and I traveled for our honeymoon after the reception, and we were phone-free all during the vacation. Once we returned, though, we found a storm waiting at our house. Turning on my phone, I cannot even open it before an alert flood erupted. Of these, most came from my mother and brother. Mike called me all kinds of awful names and insulted me, since apparently one of my paternal aunts uploaded pictures of the wedding on Facebook and tagged them with a very clear dig at my parents, especially my mom, for missing the ceremony. The message went seemingly viral in my parents' neighborhood, and they have been publicly humiliated for mistreating me. My grandfather also personally went to see my parents to face my father, his son, embarrassing him to the point of tears. This looked to be the breaking point for my father. He ultimately revolted against my mother since he was so upset by missing the wedding of his only daughter and his father's criticism. He is now threatening divorce unless she makes it up to me. I believe this is the reason my mother has been messaging my phone, first nasty and threatening, then absolutely sad, full of pleading and pity parties. I am currently at home with my hubby, figuring out how to handle things, claiming they had no idea this was happening at home. Most of my relatives, including those I invited to the wedding, reached out to apologize for what I went through. Since my grandpa lives on the opposite side of the nation, or another state, I cannot attribute guilt to any of my relatives. But since now she is inconsolable at the notion of missing the wedding, my mom's sisters and friends are demeaning me for not telling her about it, though I'm not sure personally. I believe she's only starting to save face. The most recent text from my mother and father seemed to be quite depressed and wounded by missing my wedding. My family is split now on 3 fronts. The majority supporting me, my mother's relatives embarrassing me for hurting her emotions, and my mother's demanding that I forgive her in view of her efforts at atonement. Reddit, AA. And my best friends tell me not to pay attention to them. Edit. I really appreciate your love and comments. It is very overwhelming here. I will answer the often asked questions. I did tell my folks about my wedding. All of my guests received conventional paper invites, and I was informed that every invite had arrived at the correct address from Mike or my folks. I got no response. A few very far-off relatives and several of Lucas's side associates also ignored it. I messaged every one of them to double-check, and those who hadn't replied said they couldn't make it. When I text my brother and dad, they never answer. I was left reading, knowing them and weighing all I had to schedule. I stopped trying to insist. 2. I had already been informed that my brother had a gain. Hence I omitted mentioning the date of my wedding every time I insisted on bringing up my festivities in order to obtain a response. I was constantly told that some things were simply more important than me and not to be pissy or a hassle. By now, I believe it reasonable for me to give up arguing. Not worth the effort, was it? 3. I do not keep my wedding under wraps. I refrained from telling my parents it was my wedding to see whether they would show the least of interest. But surprise, surprise, they did not. Still, I told my relatives and uncles straightforwardly about my wedding. Sometimes my mother was on the phone. Other times she was just conversing with other people. She was in the room a few times when I discussed locations or dress stores with my aunt. She never paid attention when I brought it up. She grinned and said, "That's great, dear," at reunions, then would switch the topic from Dad and Mike. Radio silence. I stayed in touch with them as every time I tried to go no contact and see in earlier years, I was harassed, always for reasons involving my brother. I attempted after my high school, bachelor's, and master's graduations, which they never bothered to come up for. Every time I dared to turn my back on the family of my mother's aunts, brother, parents, and maternal grandparents, I was disgraced. The turning point in this is that Lucas was not at my side over all those years. We began dating a little after my previous NC try, and now that I have him here, I feel more sure of my position, but I lacked confidence before that. As I said earlier, my paternal side lives on the other side of the nation and was not aware of how my parents handled me. Once, when I was 14, I did try to show my parents. They pretended to be sorry as my aunts, uncles, and grandpa chastised them, but once we arrived home, I was subjected to gaslighting and beating for lying. Following that, I had regular communication with my paternal side, but refrained from acknowledging my parents' mistreatment out of anxiety, which to be honest still torments me now. Only grandpa knew. But if he tried anything, he was always under danger from my alienation. 5. I am not from the same city as my parents. They don't know my new address. I live in a city 1 hour's drive from my parents' little town. This is thus because my mother supported my brother's backup, stating siblings share their belongings, after he tried to break into my apartment in search of some money. I move now and will be cautious not to let them know where I live. Before he even began high school, my parents bought my brother a house and a car. Instead, for his 16th birthday, they purchased him a house close to his college and a car he started his freshman year. They simply lied to me and utilized my money later for my brother, saving it for later on. They did not use it straight away. Update. 1. To those who thought my story was false. Let me remark that to the extent of considering my reality as a fantasy, your family life is better than mine. However, if you would quit sending DMs and bothering me under the pretext of me fabricating a tale, it would be much appreciated. I was overwhelmed and bawling my eyes out from the abuse of my family. Thus, I overlooked a few specifics in the original message. Although you are not compelled to believe my account or follow it, I would like the least degree of politeness maintained before delving into the update. Let me also clarify a few points. 1. Indeed, the invitation said clearly it was a wedding, no justification. 2. My mother's side of the family skipped the wedding. I apologize for not making that obvious in the first post. Most of them were occupied. The others only offered me gifts or reasons but did not show up. That is exactly what I mean. It's not like I live in their thoughts. So don't ask me why they didn't talk about my wedding with my mother. The fact that my mother sent an SMS apologizing serves as her atonement. Let me now turn to the update. This past week, things have been a little wild. I went off Reddit for a few days to sort through my ideas. I then spent a lot of time discussing with Lucas how to go forward. He has been my rock. I could never love him more than I already do. Though my parents were always a forbidden subject, he gave me a hard reality check I really needed. We came to the conclusion that my constant contact, sticking around, and inability to go and see is not healthy. I now see that my lack of complete participation in NC stemmed from deep down, even now, merely wanting their approval. Pathetic, I know, but it feels like a drug. Being with my folks until they are not, they can be loving, humorous, sympathetic, and warm. Their small love makes you want more and drives you to ruin yourself in great need of their praise. That is sufficient, though. I told myself that things will evolve. After some contemplation, I decided to start therapy and to avoid all people who raised concerns about this matter for good, this time. After spending a day thinking about how I felt, I messaged my father to let him know I would meet Mom, Dad, and Mike in a neutral area the next day should he want to discuss. He answered instantly and agreed. We convened at the park, and for damage control, my father's sisters and brother joined us. Looking troubled, as if he had been crying for some time, was my father, though my mother looked the same. I believe it was more out of shame and resentment. My brother gave an irritated glance. I informed the three of them how their behavior and inclination for my brother constantly upset me and how their violent behavior made me realize I wanted no more interaction with any of them. Following that conference, my mother attempted to cut me off several times, but my aunt, the Facebook post author, shut her off every single time. They didn't know what to reply when I questioned them why they treated me this manner. My uncle chastised my father for his continuing tears and apologies without response, though, in the end, she merely declared she simply hated me, plain and simple. My mother seemed as if she was asking herself that for the first time. Regarding my brother, he merely enjoyed the attention and made me miserable as some sort of sport. I continued to ask questions. They claimed to have never gotten an invite. When I queried why they never answered it when I showed them the books, they denied getting them. As it happens, they hadn't actually gotten my wedding invite. They vanished from their residence when it arrived. My brother, who had come visiting for the weekend, was the only one in the house, as many of you would have imagined. He tore up and wrecked the invite. Then he erased the messages. When I texted my parents, he said it was easy, as they kept my conversation preserved and omitted the notices. My parents thus never received an official invitation at all. I was simply upset when I questioned Mike about why he would do that. He simply shrugged and said it wasn't as crucial as the other things they had scheduled anyhow. I had to stop Lucas from giving him a facial punch. Oddly enough, my folks were agitated and began chastising him. I have to admit that I was partly happy since he started to have a tantrum and scream crocodile tears. Then my mother said that everything was settled and that there was no need to wrangle over a misinterpretation. She indicated it was time for me to clear their name. That started me, so I stopped her and told her they were not forgiven at all. Mike wrecked the invite, but that did not imply that all their carelessness was immediately annulled. And all that time, I was clearly having a wedding. They ought to have inquired about it. Are you curious about the reaction of my mother? I did hear you talking about a wedding of yours, but I just thought you were being delusional and seeking my attention with exaggerated scenarios, she stated. She was sure Lucas would never marry me and didn't really like me. Do you trust me when I tell you I was ready to trash her face? Another issue surfaced. My brother apparently had hardly any football games to choose from to create a narrative to dodge my incident. My parents exploited the knowledge. My husband, friends, and I know little to nothing about football. We prefer soccer. And the fact I stopped asking about it when Mike would mock me during his time in high school. Since Lucas and I are blocked and my brother has private social media, I couldn't verify or refute the existence of a game. When I originally posted, I took stupid faith in my parents' words. No, though you're interested in where the Montshield disappeared to, I was really burned out and overwhelmed by the volume of data. My blood boiled, and I snapped. Since I had been misled this terribly, rising, I informed my father he was a depressed, weak man, unable to defend his children until his wife approved of it. I advised my brother he would always live like the parasite he is, baby to the point of uselessness. He is a terrible excuse for a guy who will not achieve anything in life. To my mother, I stated she was the worst narcissist, a pitiful small woman who lacked even deserving treatment or evaluation for her inactivity. She is too rotten, thus even God could not be of assistance. Strong, I know. Halfway through my tirade, my mother shot from her seat to yell at me, but I was too enraged. I yelled at her too close, "Take a seat, and listen for once." She became so enraged. It seemed as though steam were emanating from her ears. After that, I seem to recall not much except that I kept talking. My anguish and wrath seemed to pour out. I'm very convinced the entire park was silent at one point, telling my parents and Mike I was disowning them all, and that if they were clever, they would think before reaching out again. I spit at them, taking my pocketbook, and left with Lucas, Anna, and Francis, leaving my parents and brother at the kindness of my aunts and uncles. The truth of what I had just discovered and spoken eventually struck me at some point, and I had a panic episode on the drive home. Lucas was driving. Anna guided me through it till we stopped in a parking lot to cool me down. I owe them far more than anything. Once home, I just collapsed onto the bed and turned in for the night. Though considering my profession and career, I couldn't expose myself in that way. Even though I really wanted to follow your advice and put the entire chat on Facebook. One thing is sharing my tale on Reddit from an unidentified throwaway. The other is Facebook with my identity and face all over. Showing that road was not one I could travel. Rather, I behaved better. I created a folder containing all of my mother's nasty remarks, texts, and insults and forwarded it to the woman running my mother's church. Though my mother worked her ass off to enter this close-knit community, it is also somewhat judgmental. Well, that's exactly what occurred. Being rejected by them is like dying. Like clockwork, the scandal started out in the church and quickly extended across the little community. Given my tiny spill, you can see what this implies for my parents. I did discover more texts from my maternal side of the family, demeaning me even more for offending their sister or daughter. By then, I simply didn't care anymore. Following your advice, I informed them they would not be in my life going forward. They can talk as they wish. I just have no interest. Rather, they should be appreciative I do not send their unpleasant texts to their husbands or jobs. I blocked every single one of them, including my grandparents. I did come across a long note from my father. He stated he was sorry for not being strong enough to challenge my mother, agreed what I said was accurate, and couldn't believe he had missed so much of my life due to her. Tired of being controlled, he informed me he was going to divorce her regardless of my choice. He stated he wanted a relationship with me to offset all the years gone by. I did respond to him, saying at the moment I truly do not want to see him or pardon him. He said he loves me, and he will do his best to get me back. I answered that I then blocked him too, since I find that hard to believe. Frankly, his slimy approach of attempting to get out from under this issue by dumping my mother under the bus is pitiful. She owned it, and at least was hostile. He only blames others for his decisions. Hence, I do not want to hang around people like that. Likewise, blocked are my mother and brother. I just blocked Mike as he messaged me more to harass and threaten. My mother gave herself a pity party for her marriage falling apart and for her being outcast by her neighborhood. I simply said, "Good," then blocked her too. Regarding my grandfather, he has chosen to stay with us temporarily to be at my side. Having perused some of your remarks, he truly is the finest. He won't own that he finds them flatulent. A few days have gone since then. All has been peaceful. Lucas is spoiling me rotten, and I have therapy shortly. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.